Welcome to a conversation with Joseph Dunn. Thank you so much, Joseph, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today to discuss French language and Francophone culture. For more than 30 years, for more than 20 years, his deep understanding of Louisiana's distinct languages, cultures, and history has allowed Joseph Dunn to work at the highest levels of the state's tourism and cultural industries. In 2014, he began work as an independent tourism and cultural entrepreneur after 3 years as executive director of the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, CODEFIL. His primary role is to oversee the public relations and marketing efforts at Laura Plantation, among other projects that highlight the French and Creole-speaking heritage of Louisiana. Joseph is an outspoken advocate for the development of professional and economic opportunities for French and Creole-speaking Louisianians. Thank you again, Joseph, for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
A question that I would really like to ask you, I would like you to tell us, please, about your personal experience with the French language and Francophone culture, and how that has led to your leadership role in advocacy for French language and Francophone culture in the U.S.
Sure thing. My family has been in Louisiana for at least 10 generations, so since the 1720s or so. And up until just a few generations before I was born, French was the principal language spoken in one side of the family. I grew up speaking English, was educated in English. My household was English. But my grandparents had friends who were from South Louisiana and would spend quite a lot of time with them. They would come and visit. They were both in the dairy farm industry, and so we were often with them doing family things together, and they spoke French. And I remember once when I may have been 4 or 5 years old, they did a communal boucherie where they killed a pig, and they were doing that whole sort of traditional thing. And the grandmother of that family could not speak English. She could only speak French. She was a monolingual French speaker. There were some of those still around actually in the 1970s and 1980s. I just remember wanting to be able to talk to her and speak to her. Her own grandchildren couldn't even speak with her because they had not, it was, in that time period when French was not transmitted generationally. And then at a later time, my small little Methodist church had sponsored the building of a mission church with the Houma Indian group, who were evangelized by the Methodists and not by the Catholics. Imagine that in South Louisiana. And so we went down to visit, and I was trying to buy a little cypress pirogue for myself and a palmetto fan for my mother, and could not speak with the old man who was trying to sell them. And I remember then again thinking, there's something here that I'm missing. There's something that's here in Louisiana that I feel like I would like to have. And even as a little kid, I thought I really want to discover this and be part of that. And so when I was in 4th grade, we had teachers were brought from Switzerland to my area of Louisiana. And so it started from the time I was about 8 or 9 years old, where I started to sort of pick French up. And then later it was almost like this weird genetic memory for me. So I've spoken French since I was a kid.
Joseph, that is really an inspirational story and so personal, so authentic. Please tell us also now a little bit about how moving forward you would envision French language and Francophone culture in the United States.
Ooh, in the United States, that's a big thing. As you know, I've been focused mostly on Louisiana, and it's only recently that I've kind of connected with the Franco-American community up in New England. And it kind of all works together because there's some of the same Acadian and Quebecois connections there that we have in Louisiana. Louisiana is such a diverse mosaic of French and Creole speakers that's set apart really sort of from the New England experience, because it was mostly, and I'll just say it like this, mostly people of European descent up there. But here in Louisiana, we're Native American, we're African, we're European. We have all of that rich mosaic going on. And so I've really been focused on how do we resensitize people to this idea of French and Creole as heritage languages in Louisiana and not foreign languages, because that's how they're presented to us in academic settings. And that's how they've been presented in academic settings since 1921, as foreign languages, even though there are people here who speak these as their first languages. So I think that moving beyond the academic approach is absolutely necessary. We've got to start thinking about how do we develop opportunities for people who already speak French, who are learning French. You know, what are those real world daily applications of these variants of French outside of a classroom? How do we reshape what's offered in universities so that there's an idea that, yeah, French is also a heritage language here on the North American continent, and not only in Europe, that we have all of these connections going on, and that it can also be an economic engine. In the same way, again, coming back to the specificity of Louisiana, that we talk about our cuisine, our music, and things like that, which are such a rich part of the Louisiana cultural landscape. How do we put language back into that cultural landscape as part of one of those aspects that is an economic development tool? I have said that the French and Creole languages in Louisiana are the most underdeveloped natural resources in the state. It's green energy, right? Language transmission is green energy. You don't have to go digging in the ground for figuring out how to use those resources as economic or professional development.
You know, I agree totally. You know, Joseph, I had the good fortune to visit Louisiana at the time that Codafil had just really been created. And I know I'm dating myself, but it was exciting times for Louisiana. And I know more recently, Louisiana has joined the Francophonie, the International Organization of the Francophonie. On this global, both at the state level, but then international, at these two levels, what do you think are the directions that how this is going to help French in Louisiana?
It first of all, it validates us in our Francophonie and our Créolophonie, because just until October of 2018, if you looked at a map of La Francophonie, like the institutional Francophonie, Louisiana didn't appear there, and now we actually are, that little space on that worldwide map, which is exhilarating actually to see. It gives us an international recognition. Our challenge here has always been to help the people who don't speak French, even though they might be of French-speaking heritage. Their grandparents, their parents might have spoken French once upon a time. They see it as folkloric. It's something that's in the past, and because they've been so assimilated into these ideas, very much like in New England, that the French that they spoke was not comprehensible by French speakers elsewhere. There's this whole hierarchy of language in French. And because they don't speak French, they don't know that it's actually a real language. It's comprehensible here in the United States. It's comprehensible in Canada. It's comprehensible in the Caribbean and Europe and Africa. And there are all of those connections there. They just don't know. And the great big challenge for us is getting our elected officials and business leaders to understand what kind of open door and opportunity that membership in the OIF is to the world. I mean, what kind of access we have to professional, to educational, to all these different kinds of opportunities that they're just not aware of because they're not living in the French-speaking sphere. So it's multiple. What can it do for us? Certainly, it's going to allow our from an educational perspective, it will allow opportunities for university students in Louisiana to perhaps go to universities abroad, because as you know, with the OIF, there are the different operators within the structure. There is the academic operator, which is the universities. There are the political sides of it, which are the parliamentarians, the legislators, the mayors. So there are all these different operators within the OIF through which we could eventually, I think, triuter. Comment tu dis ça en anglais? I usually don't have this conversation in English, so I'm struggling for my words. So for young people looking for internships, looking for opportunities, interested in politics, interested in international relations, international development, humanitarian work, there are all these different entrees now that this membership in the OIF affords us.
You know, that really, it sounds, it's so exciting. You know, when you were involved with Codafil, I know you served as the executive director. There were some initiatives at the local level to basically, certainly to teach French and to empower children to learn French. But there were also initiatives in the business area, businesses actually using French. And this, of course, was prior to Louisiana joining the Francophone. But at that time, you were already developing opportunities for young people and everybody to use French in their daily life.
Yeah, I mean, there were some great little community initiatives that popped up because I had great support from a very dynamic group of young people in Lafayette. At the time, they were called Les Franco-Jeunes. In the past 10 years or so, that's kind of, you know, everybody's sort of gone their own ways, but it was a great little nugget group of people who were looking at the same kinds of things that I was looking at, you know, because they were, all of them had all of us at my age, we've all come from French as a second language backgrounds. We didn't come from immersion backgrounds just because it didn't exist at that time. But all of us speaking fluent French, we perfected our French in Europe or here in Louisiana or in Canada, and had seen all these different kinds of models that existed elsewhere for, you know, community development, for youth programs, and all that kind of thing, and had, you know, some of us had actually lived in places where there was consumerism happening in French. And so the idea that we came up with together was, how do we take the idea of the cash mob, which was a pretty big thing a couple of years ago, where, you know, you identify a small local business, and through the use of social media, you sort of mobilize a whole group of people to go and buy at that store, identifying, like, you might, okay, everybody's going to go spend $10 at this small business on this Saturday of the month or whatever. And so we decided that we would identify within Lafayette some of the small businesses where you could actually get service in French. You could go and, you know, consume, you could order, you could buy, you could do that whole transaction in French. And we called it Pièce en masse, which was kind of a little takeoff of the radio song, Il y a de la place en masse dans mon jacuzzi. So we did Pièce en masse. And it was a phenomenal success, and we were able to keep that momentum going for about a year. But you know, it was all volunteer effort, so, you know, everybody had their own things going on, and it was not easy to keep it rolling. But you know, it proved to the point that there are people in Louisiana who want to frequent businesses where they can get service in French, and there are businesses who can actually service people who want to buy. So it was a fun little experiment, and we had great success with it.
You know, I love the combination of past, present, and future that you've mentioned, and also the academic piece versus the pragmatic daily life piece. Um, you know, what advice would you give to parents? Not all parents live in Louisiana where there are such well-developed immersion programs, but overall, what advice would you give to parents, either who are of French background, may or may not speak French to varying degrees, and even those of us who may not be of French background or Francophone background, but view French as a truly American language, part of our, what is now the United States, since the earliest days of the European era. What advice would you give to us for our children?
For your children? Oh boy. So I've done this own experiment with my children. I have two kids, a son who's 28 and a daughter who's 18, so there's 10 years between them. And with my own son, I thought, I'll be able to speak French passively with him. We can decide, like, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays is going to be French day, and we'll speak French. And it didn't work, because obviously English is the dominant language. Everything, television, media, everything is English. And even though he has a really good accent, he imitates really well. He can order food, he can order drinks, he can go to the bathroom, all that kind of stuff in French. He can't have a conversation. With my daughter, I decided that I would speak only French with her, and our entire relationship is French language based. And one of the things that I realized was the concept of the intimacy of language, that you build a relationship with someone, anybody. I mean, and you have obviously different degrees of relationships with people, but you build relationships with people in the language that you speak with them. And so my daughter's and my relationship is completely francophone. We don't know how to speak English to each other. And so finding resources for my son when he was born was almost impossible, because it was before internet and all that, or internet was just starting. But now there are so many resources available, even if you don't speak French, to expose children to it. You can put the language settings on your computer. There are all kinds of children's programming online, on YouTube and other places. But I think the first suggestion is to just make sure that as young as you can begin, that they're exposed to it, that they hear it, because hearing language is incredibly important for children, so that they hear the sounds and they can begin to repeat them and things like that. Secondly is to get beyond the fear of making mistakes. If you speak French partially, if you are just beginning, move beyond that fear of making mistakes, because even native French speakers make mistakes in their own languages in the same way that English speakers do. So sort of move beyond that, and understand that French is a global language. It's not spoken only in France. It's not an elitist language, even though it sort of has that reputation here in the United States. It's a language that's spoken by 230 million people across the planet, and it is a language of development. It's a language of education. It's a language of exchange. It's a language of relationships. It's a language of friendships. It's a language that offers springboards to all kinds of opportunities. And I think we collectively, as French speakers, have to figure out how best to communicate that to people, so that they will see and begin to understand that it's not a language of the past at all. It's very much a language of the future. I mean, the most developing emerging economy is Africa, French-speaking Africa. So, and we have the advantage here in Louisiana of having a very African-based culture. So we connect really, really easy with Africans on the music scene and on the cultural, just from the way that we interact with people. But my advice is to embrace it as a heritage language, embrace it as a language of, like I said, as a language of the future.
Is there any particular action step or action steps that you would recommend to all of us who love French? It sounds like you're telling us to use it and use it at any at any moment that is possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, here in the United States, I mean, no matter where you are in the world where there's the majority language, you're automatically going to default to the majority language. When you go to Starbucks and order your coffee, you'll say hello, thank you, that sort of thing. I play all the time. I'll say bonjour and merci, and I am absolutely astounded at the number of baristas at Starbucks who will respond de rien when I say merci. It's just like, because it's fun. It's like just to play with it and see how, because they're, unless you know that somebody speaks French, you're never going to discover those other people who do until you start speaking that language to them. So you know, use it, absolutely use it. Action steps. Now no matter what language you speak, if you speak 14 languages, the language that you speak is always a conscious choice, right? And so if you're in a place where you know that there are other people who speak French, even partially, if you make the default language English, you're never going to progress in your ability or your comfortableness, comfort, that's the word, or your comfort to speak the language. So I think that's a huge important action step, is just whenever possible, make French your default language, and play with it. Like, seriously, make it fun. You know, try to order your Starbucks in French, or say merci or bonjour to people, and just see what happens.
Well, I don't know. That might be good advice for me. I've read recently that there were over 80,000 New Yorkers who speak French in the home. So perhaps I can take French out, and I may be surprised by how many people will respond to my bonjour.
Let me tell you, the last time that I was in New York, I took a cab maybe 5 times, and in every cab, I spoke French. With an Egyptian, with a Malian, with a Haitian. I can't remember what background the other people had, but I mean, just in that, I mean, you've got Africa, North Africa, the islands represented in this language, and just goes to show to what extent it's a global. And you know, if I hear somebody speaking English who I think has maybe just a twinge of a French accent, I'll ask if they speak French, and then continue it in French. So I mean, it's the question of making the conscious effort to do it, and you have to put yourself in that mindset.
You know, I love that idea. We live in a globalized, interconnected world. New York and many other cities are global cities, and French is a global language.
Absolutely.
Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You know, keep up the good work. Bon courage, bonne chance, and thank
merci, c'est gentil. Merci à vous.
Un grand merci. À bientôt, mon ami.
À bientôt. Au revoir.